Hello and welcome back to another DF Retro Play. I'm John, and this time I brought him back. He's back to play with me. It's Audi Sorlie.
Hello there, John. I am Audi. I'm not Mark.
You're not Try,
Good to
no.
see you.
Yeah,
No,
it's good to have you back on here, and we have a pretty fun one today because we decided that the Game Boy, it's great. People say it's not the best, but I disagree. Nintendo recently released some classics for the Nintendo Switch, bringing back the Game Boy for those
sure did.
subscribing to the Switch Online. And this was kind of like, hey, why don't we do our own thing on Game Boy, covering games that perhaps, well, maybe one of them's already on there, but these other ones perhaps not. So the idea is that we each picked 3 of our favorite Game Boy games, like our very favorite Game Boy games, and we hand that list to the other person, and then they play through the game while we talk about our memories with the game, anything interesting about it, all that kind of good stuff, right?
Because usually when we pick a theme, we did the first-person shooters on N64.
Yep.
We've done 3D games on the Super Nintendo. All good reasons to sign up to our Patreon.
Exactly.
But it's kind of fun because usually we're just like, well, we really like these games. They're not necessarily obscure, but just kind of like, what if we just play some of our favorite games?
Yeah.
And, it's a novel concept, but I think we're crazy enough to do it.
Lean into that nostalgia a little bit. So
A little bit.
we're doing this in 2 parts. For this first episode, I have selected 3 games for you to play, and I'm going to talk about them with you. And for part 2, you have selected 3 games for me to play. So
yes.
With that said, let's get into it. I'm actually holding up a copy right here. This is the Japanese version, but it's Castlevania 2, or Dracula Densetsu 2. So this is a very special game to me, and one I played a lot back in the day. And I think it's also one of the best sounding Game Boy games, with a soundtrack that's among the best in the entire Castlevania series.
Right.
Believe it or not, it's very, very good. And it's also a game that is a marked improvement over its prequel, which I will also talk about. But first, right away, once you go ahead and start the game here.
Let's start it right now. Yeah, I don't have as much. I played this a few times over the years, just kind of testing it out on emulation and stuff like that.
And this right here is actually one of the more unique things about it. It offers a MegaMan-like stage select. Unlike
where do you suggest I start?
Why don't you start on the upper left there, the default position. Right. Unlike Mega Man, you don't necessarily gain powers and go back to the stages or anything like that, but the first 4 stages of the game you have some say in terms of the order that you play them, which is cool. It's a nice touch. It's good for a portable game, right? As you practice the levels.
Look at this. I love the understated backgrounds of good Game Boy games.
Oh, yeah.
Just kind of like it's implied.
Beautiful pixel art, huh?
Yeah. And yeah, I remember, because I did have the first Castlevania game on Game Boy, which is why I didn't pick this up, which was a huge mistake to make as a kid.
Sure.
But the first game I remember being, the controls are really slow and laggy, and the game itself just like, it feels like walking through mud. This is already a huge improvement from my memories of the first game.
That's interesting, because the first game, which was just the Castlevania Adventure, was the second Game Boy game I ever owned.
Oh, I see.
Well, I got that and the first Tiny Toons game at the same time, and it was due to I had to get hernia surgery as a kid. So, which was unpleasant, but the good side was that my parents were like, "You want to get some Game Boy games? You can play it when you go in for surgery." So I was like, "Yes, I will take more Game Boy games." And
you know what's really funny about that story is that I got my Game Boy when I was in for surgery, not for hernia, but for something else as a kid.
That's wild.
So we both got our Game Boy memories from a hospital bed, it sounds like.
That's kind of bizarre. Actually, the thing though is when I actually went in for the surgery, I specifically remember the doctor or the nurse, I guess, pulled out a Game Boy for me to play with a copy of Dr. Mario on it, which was
wow,
pretty funny, I must say. But so the Castlevania Adventure, as you mentioned, was a troublesome game because it was an early Konami game on the Game Boy, but it had serious issues. And what's surprising today, if you go back to it, is that the frame rate is struggling bad. And not just in the way that you would expect, like a game from that era. It actually has screen tearing, like constant screen tearing.
Wow.
It's hard to notice it on an original Game Boy, you know, but it is there. And as you blow the game up, play it on a Super Game Boy or newer hardware, it's extremely obvious that the frame rate is constantly below 60 frames per second. And there's screen tearing. There's something wrong with the way the game is coded. It's just very slow. So, I mean, this is what you're playing here is not a fast-paced game, but
no,
it runs correctly, and that's the big difference, is that it's smooth and fluid versus that other one, which it literally would just run in slow motion, which made the whole thing feel like muddy and unplayable. This, I think, is a lot more responsive. What's that?
Do you know any reason why the first game would have such struggles? I mean, Konami, I mean, it was new hardware, sure, but I mean, you'd think Konami would have had a bit more know-how to navigate around it.
My guess is that they just had a B team on it, maybe, that was less familiar with that, or they didn't have a top-tier programmer working on the game. I mean, there could be a number of reasons why, but that is unfortunately how it went. And as you can see from this game, it does carry over a lot of the same concepts, specifically like the ropes, right?
Right.
So I thought about this a lot. As a kid, I was like, why does this have ropes instead of stairs? Because Castlevania games typically have stairs between areas when going vertically, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at... So this is actually a genius part on Konami's side when it came to designing this game, is that they really took into consideration the size of the Game Boy screen, or more like the number of pixels they had. Because you can actually slide down the rope, by the way. Hold the weapon button or the jump button.
Oh, really?
You can slide quickly.
I see.
But so some Game Boy games were notorious for having huge sprites, right? They wanted to keep like sprite sizes similar to NES, but because there's fewer pixels in the Game Boy screen, everything was huge and there was barely any room to work. But then you had stuff like Batman or Super Mario Land, where the sprites were like minuscule and very small, and those didn't feel satisfying either. Konami sort of found a middle ground with Castlevania here, where Simon's sprite is relatively small, but not
there was a wall there.
Yeah, but not so small that he has no detail, so it's kind of this weird middle ground. And the thing about the ropes is that they allow you to move up and down within the confines of the low resolution. Because if you put stairs in here, think about how much screen space a set of stairs would occupy. Right? It would be at least half or more of the screen. Oh, remember, you can slide fast in the rope.
I keep forgetting that.
So I think that's why they did the ropes. But because of that different design choice, it allowed some cool set pieces like this, right?
For sure.
There's nothing quite like this in the NES games. So it's a unique thing, and these games have their own vibe to them.
They never introduced the ropes into any of the NES games.
Nope,
at all.
They did not. So
or the Super Nintendo.
No,
the Super Castlevania has no ropes as you.
Super Castlevania has its own weird things when they were still discovering the series, right? Like the crazy whip that lets you swing on stuff, and there's a lot of like interesting things in that as well, before they sort of pared down the moveset to what we see in Dracula X and beyond. So I don't know, how does this strike you then, coming from...
I mean, this plays like a proper Castlevania. It's a little bit slower still than the NES game so far, but it's, I mean, on a smaller screen, even though we're not playing on a smaller screen, we're playing these on the Pocket just for transparency's sake.
Yes.
But like, it plays way better than what the first game, as I remember it, ever played.
Oh yeah, it absolutely does.
Because the first game also, you mentioned screen tearing and stuff, but like, did it also have like input delay?
It was just the frame rate was low.
Yeah.
And the controls they did actually feel pretty heavy.
Yeah,
so
sure did.
it's not that great to play, unfortunately. I did actually
There's a third game too,
but there is a third one, and that's
It's okay.
It's okay.
I like the concept of it.
Castlevania Legends, I like the concept as well, but the level design is pretty boring.
Yeah, I haven't played enough of it to like remember it.
Versus like with this, you notice there's a lot of variety in terms of like the types of challenges you're facing, right?
Yeah.
It keeps you guessing, and I think all the stages have a pretty interesting twist there. Oh, that's right. And so the original Castlevania Adventure didn't have items either, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
But even though they did bring items to this one, they only brought 2. And which items you get, I think, it varies by region. So like Japanese version here has the cross in it, and they remove the cross, and I can't remember. I think they just put in the axe instead. I think so, but they definitely changed it. And also the soundtrack in the Japanese original, all the soundtrack in the sound test, the songs all have names, but it references religious stuff. So for the US release, they just removed all the names.
That's pretty funny.
Like track 1, track 2, that kind of stuff. But I actually do want to talk again about the music. You're familiar, I guess, with Funaiuchi-san, right?
Yeah, of course.
Hidehiro. He's he doesn't seem to have stuck around in the industry. The last game I can see him credited on is an Olympics game from '97, but he did a ton of Game Boy work, and every one of his Game Boy soundtracks is absolutely sublime, including this. And one of the lesser known ones that's as good as this, I'd say, is Zen Intergalactic Ninja.
Oh, it's real good, yeah.
It's so good, right? Like it's an amazing soundtrack. Here we go, boss music. Man, I really love the pixel art here. Like there's just something about it that looks really cool. Like the way they tried to shade everything within the confines of the Game Boy's palette.
Yeah. And this is something we've talked about before, and this is a little bit more to the pocket also, but like, when games do not use the dot matrix filter, you kind of get this somewhat flat-looking
you need the dot
backgrounds
matrix
and whatnot. When you get the dot matrix, it introduces a little bit of depth. It's fairly imaginary, I suppose, but it's there. So, and this game really benefits from that.
It absolutely does.
Batman as well. It's like one of those that really just shines when it comes to getting it done.
All right, well done. First boss down. Thanks. You're not going to go through the whole game, of course.
Surely not.
We're just sampling.
We got 3 games.
Exactly. But I definitely recommend sinking your teeth into it at some point, just trying to play through it, because it is a
Is that a Dracula pun?
Yeah. So there you go. The first the level is down. Now this one is interesting because
Cloud Castle.
This was an example of baked transparency on the Game Boy. Let's see if we can see it here. So are those mountains in the background flashing to you, like flickering?
Yeah.
So here's the thing about that. The Game Boy screen was so slow and ghosty.
Yeah.
That actually, those mountains appeared to use almost like a different palette. They were much lighter in terms of shade compared to the foreground.
I remember I was looking at this on a DMG a few years ago.
So the Analog Pocket itself actually has the option to simulate that. You turn on like frame blending, so that's what that does. But it obviously adds ghosting. We have that off just for the viewing pleasure of our audience.
Yeah, just because I suppose I could have gone and turned it on and all that jazz, but it really doesn't translate too well overall in the game when we capture, resize.
Try crawling up that rope. Go all the way to the top of the rope.
Okay.
I forgot to mention earlier. I don't know if this is one that has it or not. No, it doesn't. So there's actually a lot of secret rooms hidden up in those ropes. If you just crawl to the ceiling. Oh, jump off quick!
Okay.
Oh man, look at that. Yeah, the set pieces in this are so much better than the first Game Boy game. There's a lot of like stuff done with climbing that's quite challenging and fun.
Yeah, but it's very different from what you would have gotten on the NES games, which, lends well to this. I mean, you get a completely different type of experience which is why I wanted it mostly from my Game Boy.
Careful with the spikes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
know,
like NES-like experience, but something new.
Yeah.
Oh man. Back down here.
Yeah, because you mentioned, and it's it was kind of unfair, I think, even at the time, but like, you know, the the Game Boy was very much seen as like a downgrade and like just a port machine. You would get like these pared down versions of NES games on the Game Boy, and it was eventually they started introducing these kind of original concepts in games, which hold up just as well as the NES games. But even today, I think some people do view the Game Boy as very much just kind of like a pared down NES, which
yeah, I really
certainly isn't true.
I really feel like people should give it more of a look.
Yeah.
Like, you're right. Early Game Boy though, it did have plenty of original stuff, but it always felt kind of off model and weird, or it was just like, you know, Sokoban clones, because like there's so much of that on the Game Boy.
It sure is. I mean, puzzle games in general lends itself well to Game Boy.
But they went a little bit heavy.
Oh, they sure did.
Konami though, Konami did so much great stuff on the Game Boy, and Capcom as well.
They seem to have liked it. Yeah.
Like, you were talking about NES ports, and they actually brought the 2 DuckTales games to Game Boy.
Yeah.
And they're freaking great. They're like really great conversions. It's not just a port, it's like they adapted it to the system in a way that really makes sense. Okay, if you take damage from this guy, I think you lose your whip power up.
Oh, okay.
So be careful. There you go. Oh yeah, another this part. It's a rope puzzle thing basically. Look at this.
Ooh, look at that. So you gotta jump quick over.
Yeah. It's brutal though. Can be. And then you crawl to the top.
Mm-hmm.
I love how they put that candle there, just beckoning you, like, you go ahead and
Trying.
give it a try.
You won't make it.
Yeah, and I like how all these little level areas, like these little compact challenges, all strung together. Man, it's cool.
Where do you rank this on as a Castlevania game?
Oh, that's...
Damn.
Well, maybe... We'll move on in a second, but in terms of ranking, that's a tricky one, though, because the series really is legendarily good. But I would say this would probably fall somewhere in the upper middle for me.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of Castlevania games, but there's definitely plenty of Castlevania games I like less than this by quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
So...
same for me. I mean, this is the most I've played it in a while now. I'm really enjoying this. I mean... I think I have a copy, but if not, I really should pick up one. But yeah, it's good. I mean, it's just real good. But that's as far as I'm gonna make it on this try, I think.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and switch to the next game. Rockman World 5 / Mega Man 5. This...
Good choice.
Man, now this is a fantastic example of just targeting a game for the Game Boy as a system and creating something new and special from it, right?
Yeah.
Not that this was actually made internally by Capcom, it was actually Minakuchi Engineering, who did all Game Boy games except for 2, and they also did the Mega Drive Wily Wars.
Rockman Wily.
Yeah, Rockman Mega World.
And they helped out with the X series as well, right?
I think they had some involvement, yeah.
I know audio programming and composition came from Minakuchi Engineering on the X games.
Wow. So yeah. So the Mega Man. So the first game I actually got for Game Boy was Mega Man and Dr. Wily's Revenge, which is Rockman World 1 for the Game Boy. And after that point, I got and played every single Mega Man game for Game Boy because I thought they were fantastic. And unfairly maligned, I feel. People kind of brushed them off a little bit at the time.
I don't know. I played Dr. Wily's Revenge. early on, and I was not impressed by it.
So I
But-
agree. It was clearly not as good as the NES game, right? And then Mega Man 2
Yeah.
comes along from a different developer, and it feels really sloppy, and the music was off key. The whole
Yeah.
thing was strange. But then Mega Man 3 arrived, and that one I felt actually did it right. And 3, 4, and 5 are all exceptionally solid games, with challenges built around the constraints of the Game Boy screen. And yeah, good.
Let's just start with this.
So, just to recap for people, the first 4 Game Boy Mega Man games were all derived from themes in the NES games, but what
Yeah.
they did was combine, like for Dr. Wily's Revenge, the first 4 stages are bosses from Mega Man 1. But then you end up facing all the bosses from Mega Man 2 in another stage. But after Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge, every Game Boy game after that would do this pattern where you have 4 initial stages based on, say, like if you're playing Mega Man 3, the first 4 stages are based on Mega Man 3 stages from NES. Then
Yeah.
you do a Wily stage in the middle, and then you get 4 more stages based on Mega Man 4 from the NES, right? So that's how they would basically combine themes from 2 different games. Oh, I saw that coming.
Yeah, you definitely do.
But
So you have to jump down there.
so that actually continued through Mega Man 4 and the Game Boy. Now they were actually, I would say, original games. Like even though they did borrow the boss themes and concept, they featured original stages designed for the Game Boy, right? So it wasn't just duplicates or ports. But for Mega Man 5 here, they were given a chance to make a completely original Mega Man game. And that's what we're seeing here. This is all new bosses, all new stages, nothing to do with any prior Mega Man game. It's just an original Mega Man experience for the Game Boy. And it's really good. It's so well made. Watch out. Straight down.
Should be fine now.
Watch out again, though. Okay, you're fine. So, we're actually playing the original version here, but this game actually did get a colorized release recently, which is super cool.
Oh yeah, and it's incredible looking, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's so sad that you remember back on Game Boy Advance they announced Mega Man Mania,
Yeah,
and it was supposed to be
the Game Boy
all
games.
colorized versions, yeah. But now we're getting them thanks to the fan community. But
Exactly.
it looks so good. It's incredible.
The thing I really love about that conversion is that they actually changed the palette on Mega Man based on the weapon he's holding,
Yes.
which was a standard thing in the NES game, right? But on the original Game Boy, there's not enough. There's, your palette's so small and it's not color that Mega Man's look does not change when he changes weapons. He always looks the same. So that was kind of one kind of downside. Although thinking of
Also,
portable,
they fixed the slowdown on that one.
yeah, and they're using the extra hardware from the Game Boy Color, I guess.
Yeah, because there is slowdown in this game.
For sure. It's not too bad, but
It's not too bad.
this and Castlevania 2, both 60 frames per second games by and large, but they can drop some frames, especially this one. Which, it is what it is. It's the Game Boy. What can you do? But I love all the sprite and tile work in this. I think it looks really good.
I would say that this game aesthetically pretty much nails the resolution of the Game Boy perfectly. Like, everything is visible, everything is exactly the perfect size to work on this format,
Exactly.
and it's one of my favorite examples of just kind of translating console gaming to handheld, is this one. Other than, like, you have stuff like Dr. Mario and whatnot, it just works fundamentally, but like this, platformers were not
No, it was difficult.
immediately figured out on Game
Careful.
Boy. And Super Mario Land,
Slide back. Yeah, you got it. Yo. Okay.
I just want to scare you.
So I think that's a really good point. I agree with this because one of the complaints, like leveraged at these games, has been that the screen real estate is it's shrunk, right, compared to the NES games, and that people put them off for that reason. But the challenges are designed with this screen resolution in mind, and as a result, I actually think it works really well.
Sure, yeah, it really does.
disease. Also, I would say the music is good in this one, but it's maybe not quite as good as some of the other ones. But I really like the Game Boy renditions of classic Mega Man themes, because the Game Boy does have a slightly different sound to it, right?
Yeah. I mean, it has one less channel but it's stereo.
It's stereo.
So it kind of.
So you get some really nice stereo separation, and it sounds good, I think. Okay.
I will say though, if you're into Game Boy Mega Man music, there's an artist called Rush Jet that made really good conversions of the Game Boy soundtracks to the NES palette.
That's awesome. Okay, now you can try to take that boss on.
Do you have any hot tips? The John Linneman hotline?
No,
do you remember Mercury Man?
I remember that I would always beat him without a weapon.
Ah.
So just use the Mega Buster. You just have to dodge those things. That's it.
Okay.
And then fire, and then watch out for that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm starting to get the pattern here.
Yeah. So he does one of the others. Okay. One or the other, I guess. Oh.
I always jumped too far.
I would say this game is somewhat forgiving by Mega Man standards. It's not that hard, which kind of makes sense given the platform again, because, you know,
yeah,
the DMG screen. There we go. Also, because of the dimensions, the boss fights are constrained, right? They take place in smaller rooms. So that could be a little tricky. It was trickier in the earlier ones, I'd say. But yeah, so this was a game I wish... So this game is extremely valuable today. And it's an annoying one because I do own copies of it now, but I have the Japanese version, like I held up, because I sold all my original Game Boy stuff back in the 90s.
Right.
To get, like, a 3DFX card and something else for my PC. Which was a mistake. I should have kept it all because I had all the boxes for these games. So I had a boxed Mega Man 5. I just freaking sold it, man.
One thing that's kind of interesting too, I forget if the fourth game does it, but like you get this little demo of the weapon you get in this game.
Oh, yeah.
Like he uses it, whereas usually in the NES games you would just get like this graphic that said like you got
something shot. Yeah, I don't think they did that in all of them. And then they have this whole shop system here, which is nice.
Yeah.
Where you collect that stuff, and man, this is a solid Mega Man game right here.
Yeah. How do I exit though?
There should be like an option to exit within that little
it's
menu.
Probably the small one. Yes.
Good luck, Mega Man.
Good luck, Mega Man.
Look, Mega Man. I'd like to see this game with voiceovers from the Mega Man 8 cast.
Yeah, exactly. Dr. Wily.
Dr. Wily.
Like, I've always wondered if, like, it's a put-on accent or a speech impediment. Because sometimes I feel bad for, like, making fun of it in case, like, well, maybe that voice actor has that, voice. But I'm starting to lean on the fact that I don't think maybe they took their job too seriously.
Yeah, or more like the editors of the dialogue perhaps didn't do a thorough enough job, or when they were doing the sessions, they didn't record enough takes.
Yeah.
Like we did.
I mean, Capcom.
24 sessions, and this was the best one we had. I liked the English voice cast for the Mega Man Legends games, though. I thought those were great. They're super anime, but like in a great way. It's very, very enjoyable.
That, we will do a video on Legends somehow, I think, in future, because there's a lot I want to say about it. It has that perfect low poly. Oh, did I break the game?
No, dead.
Oh, you just died.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we should move on to our last game though, because we don't want each section to go too long, right?
No. So,
what do you think of this then?
This is absolutely my favorite of the Mega Man Game Boy games, and didn't really mention it, but I really like... So, the last point I want to make about this game is that on NES, I'm not a big fan of the charge shot when they introduced that.
Yeah.
I think it breaks the flow of Mega Man games.
Yeah.
In this game, it's the... I forget what they call it in-game, but it's the arm cannon, literally, like the arm bazooka you see here.
Yep.
You see that it comes back, and it has a little bit more strategy to it than just simply having a burst shot. So I really enjoy the charge shot in this game, whereas on NES, it's one of my least favorite introductions to the game.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know how you feel about it.
In this one, they use it. That's how you get your currency, right? So,
Right.
like, you're basically firing it into an enemy, and then it comes back, and you get a little bit of currency that you can use in the shop.
Yeah.
And it feels fairly well balanced around it. But again, you know, this game is not that difficult, so could be argued. But I think it's fine. It never bothered me that much.
I just don't like it on the NES. But here, they found a kind of good solution to it, and I kind of wish they would have made use of it on an NES game or even Super Nintendo a little bit. But
Yeah.
well, great game, and it should be on everyone's list of Game Boy games to check out.
And it would be nice if they re-released this one on the Switch, but I guess it
Sure would.
they already got
in color.
They already have Capcom games on the new Switch service, right? So
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if it shows up on the service. But if you really want to check this game out in a new way, as John mentioned, that
color conversion,
color hack that came out, which is called Mega Man 5 DX,
it's so good.
Absolutely fantastic.
Speaking of DX, maybe we should get to our final game for this one. And yes, I am holding up the DX version of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening because this is the version I have boxed. This is actually the later release, but it still has black and white support. I originally played the black and white version, and this is a game where I thought it's like, man, do I really want to include this in this video? Because this is a game everybody knows so well, and there's been a lot said about it, right? But
yeah,
if we're really thinking about favorite games in the Game Boy, I can't not mention it.
It should be there.
It's too darn good. Like this is mind-blowingly good in terms of a 2D overhead Zelda game. It's actually shocking how well this turned out, because I think it is significantly better. I mean, again, big year difference there, but it's significantly better than the NES games, I would say.
Absolutely.
It's super refined. It feels like it walks in the same sort of way as A Link to the Past and Super NES, but in a small format. DF Red, that works.
Now, would you say, though, because I played this when it came out, and for me, this is a turning point for Game Boy.
Yeah, you're right, because it did kind of feel like Game Boy was, it came and went, and people liked it, but it somehow didn't catch on. I don't know. I mean, it obviously sold well, but I don't... There was something about it that made it feel like it wasn't being taken seriously, especially in the face of like Super NES and Sega Genesis and all that, right? And there was a lot of advertisement happening with, the Game Gear from Sega, which was actually doing pretty well too. But I feel like this is one of those games that really helped put the Game Boy back on the map for people that were really into video games, because it was just like shockingly great for the platform. It's like, how is this so good? The design here is so brilliant. Like, so this whole first section here, leading up to getting your sword, and then sort of guiding you into the Lost Woods and figuring out how to proceed from there, and then making your way to the first dungeon. It's all laid out so well.
Yeah.
And even years later, like, this is a game I can pretty much remember the entire map just by thinking about the game. Like the map layout is so burned into my brain from playing it so much.
It's also very readable, though. I mean, it's a design thing too, where the map is just very, very readable.
It really is. Also, so this is a funny thing. The original release, not the DX version, did you ever mess with the select glitch?
No.
So this was something, when I discovered this as a kid, I abused the heck out of it for fun, after having already beat the game. But when you hit the edge of the screen like that,
Mhm.
if you pressed select, I think it was, maybe it was start, but it was one of the buttons, right as you hit the edge of the screen and then unpaused it after that, it would actually warp you across to the other side of the screen. So if you came in on the left, you would appear on the right when you unpause the game.
Is that so?
So you could essentially go straight to like the last dungeon right away, and you could break the entire pacing of the game by getting to places you should not be able to get to, and sometimes you could get to places that you were never supposed to go to, and it was really weird and fun, even though it was extremely unintentional, I'd imagine.
Was that the first time you kind of encountered something like that in video games?
Yeah, to that degree where I suddenly had this power over the game to kind of control what I did in it. And it was
Yeah.
just like, whoa, this is nuts. And just experimenting with it. Figuring out where I could break the game, where I could go, all that kind of stuff. That was really fun. But so, this game, weirdly enough, is associated with one of the first... No, it's my very first plane trip that I ever took.
Wow.
So a friend and I flew out to California to stay with his, like, aunt and uncle.
Hmm.
And that was, you know, my first time doing something like that. And I had the Game Boy with me. You know, in between going out and doing stuff, I was replaying the heck out of this game. And so I always associate this one with the California, like, mountains where we stayed. In more northern California. Sitting outside at sunset, playing Zelda.
Wow. My friend always, you were talking about like the view of the Game Boy earlier.
Yeah.
My friend always called it the car Nintendo in the region,
Oh,
like the car Nintendo,
that's a pretty good
because that was like that was the only place he played the Game Boy.
in the car. That's funny.
In the car, because his dad was a truck driver. So he'd sometimes, especially in summer, that's why I was reminding you of it right now. In summer, he would go on these, like, I wouldn't see him for like a month, because he would go on with his dad down to like Germany and stuff
wow,
for
okay.
these long treks with a truck. And he'd bring the Game Boy, and he'd always come back with new Game Boy games that were in German. And
like Autofans.
he didn't. No, I mean like they were just translated in German. He did not get Otifants, as much as Thomas Nickel would have loved that. This game, though, speaking about Germany, do you know the story about this game in Germany?
I do not.
So, this has one of the craziest German localizations that Nintendo probably never fully agreed to. I don't think they knew what they were getting or ever looked into it, because it references things that shouldn't reference. There's mentions of condoms in the game. There's a lot of interesting stuff in the German version. There is articles out there about it,
I need to look into
so I'm not
this.
going to go into full detail. But it sure is nuts.
See,
what this game. There are other games as
I've
well.
gathered that this was pretty common back then. Like another
Yes.
one that's also famous for that is Secret of Mana, with an extremely weird German localization, even referencing like German sitcoms from the time.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
they just got away with some crazy stuff.
It is nuts sometimes. The story of Nintendo in Europe in general is weird, but yeah, this game is probably the most famous example of like the localization.
Yeah. Playing around with the localization on a Legend of Zelda game is not something you would expect to see.
No, and not in the way
So,
that they did.
You should be going all the way back to the left. And then
that's right.
up. Although,
Okay,
again,
you're right.
due to how this game's designed, you're basically stuck in a sandbox right now with like walls around it where you can explore that whole village if you want, but you will not be able to get out. Like, you'll just keep bumping up against edges that you cannot cross yet. So
Right.
it kind of pushes you to eventually end up here. And then the owl always flies in and sort of gives you an idea, like, hey, you're going the right way. Just keep moving.
Was this the first game of the owl, or because it's on Ocarina of Time?
There's definitely no owl that I remember in A Link to the Past.
No, there's only the white bird that
Yeah.
you can call on to fly around. The seagull.
Yeah. There's nothing like this.
Music though in this game, it's just this game is
really
perfect.
Great. It's really good. It's one of the best games ever made for Game Boy, I think.
It's one of the best games ever made, in my opinion. I think this is a perfect game in many, many ways. And one that will never age badly, as they like to say. Like, this one you can pick up and play. If an indie company released this today, as like a Steam game, as a reflection on like the Game Boy times, you know, it would be just as good.
Exactly.
It's such a timeless design, and Link to the Past is just, you know, it's just as good in its own right. I don't hold one over the other. But
I think it's impressive that they were able to offer an experience that was in many ways close to A Link to the Past, visual and gameplay wise, on this system. Obviously, again, time had passed, so the NES originals were from a very different era of Nintendo, right? They could have done this game on the NES for sure. It's just due to the time that this came out, that wouldn't have happened. But this feels, I mean, this feels like a 16-bit game in terms of design, even if, you know, there are obvious limitations. When I was young, though, I was always a little bit annoyed that they went back to the screen-by-screen scrolling like this. It's like, oh man, I want it to be like Link to the Past. But in retrospect, I think this sort of grid-based scrolling worked pretty well for the Game Boy.
Yeah.
And I also wanted, well, basically like slopes. I wanted non-90-degree angle surfaces. But you know, I was obsessed with slopes and spinning coins in the Game Boy. That's what I wanted, man. But when I look back at this game now and consider what it is, I get why they wouldn't have done that. Because again, if you did have anything other than these straight walls, it would take up so much screen real estate on the Game Boy. Yeah. And every time you add more tile sets to the mix, you're increasing the cartridge size, which directly cost money back then. So we know the Game Boy can do those things now, and there's plenty of games that did. But they clearly made very specific decisions at the time about what the tile sets would look like. And I think that's why they did not go with any of those, like, slanted walls or anything like that, like we saw. But this does keep that nice sort of shaded look of a 16-bit game, where like all the edges of the tiles is really nicely done. It feels like it has a little bit of a depth to it.
How do you feel about the sword power-ups you get in the game?
Those are fun.
That's
also this is the Zelda game that had actual jumping, right? You equip that feather and you suddenly had a jump button, which is nuts.
You also get like side-scrolling. I mean, this has been seen in
it's
Zelda 2.
But also Zelda 1 has that stuff for some of the, like when you go down to get certain items and such, you know, like in the dungeons, it switches to side view. And yeah, they brought that back, which is fun, but then they brought in like those weird like Mario characters, basically, like Goombas.
Yeah, you can stomp on Goombas and stuff,
Which, this is something I also love about the Game Boys. It felt like Nintendo maybe didn't pay as close I don't want to say didn't pay attention, but more like the teams working on these games just kind of had a little more freedom somehow. Like not following the design principles of Mario or Zelda that may or may not have been established, I'm not sure, but it's like just the idea of them saying, yeah, we're just gonna throw in like Mario characters into this game. Or, you know, the Super Mario Land games, which just go in so many weird, wild directions. Like, this Game Boy stuff was like a fever dream for Nintendo.
Yeah.
But very well done. But, you know, people know this game very well, so perhaps we should draw this one to a close for now. It's a great game. It's still a great game. And on the next part of our Game Boy retrospective sort of EFR play, it's my turn to play some Game Boy games that you've selected. I can't wait to see what those are. So
yeah, not too obscure. I mean, it's kind of fun sometimes not to always have to pull out the darkest of our drawers.
Yeah,
but
if we had been doing 5 games, I feel like I would have included the second Tiny Toons game and maybe either Wario Land 3, Kid Dracula, or maybe even the second Batman game.
Oh, the second Batman game is good. Where does the Super Mario Land 2 land for you, though?
That would probably be closer to like number 10 on a list.
Yeah, because I know you
I
really
love
like
that game, but I actually think it has aged worse than a lot of these other games that I like, and it's not quite as excellent to play somehow. I don't know. It's good, but it's not good in the same way that Link's Awakening is good, right?
Right.
When you compare it
I
to
would agree with this.
the other parts of the series.
Right.
Wario Land, though, Mario Land 3, I think is really well done.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
Gosh, man, Game Boy. But that's gonna do it for this one. So we'll see you on part 2.